Yes.
The other, and just to clarify what you said before, we will not, for a single dwelling, the lot size does not change.
Councillor Jones.
Madam Mayor, at the risk of repeating myself, I wanted to point out the work that our staff have done in the planning department around this. And I also wanted to point out why it's so valuable to us. With the state government bringing down this blanket policy on how this can happen and how blocks can be divided, I think it's really crucial that we protect the essence of Yass Valley. And if you can see deep down in this document, we're sacrificing a lot of lots, but that's okay because we're Yass Valley and we're not Sydney Metropolitan. And I think it not only speaks to the professionalism of our staff, but also the fact that they live here in Yass Valley and they get the fact that, you know, our way of life and our block sizes is an important part of that. And the intricacy of how we're approaching this is how do we fill how do we fill our towns and our villages with the population that we need to sustain and build to our population that we're going towards. And our staff have dealt with that in zoning. So we know that we're going to need more people in Yass Valley. We know that we're going to have an ageing population, which are going to need smaller blocks. And I wanted to point out that that we haven't ignored that, and the staff have rightly addressed this in the zonings for other areas. So I commend them and commend their work, and thank you very much.
Well done, thank you. Okay, councillors, are there any other, well, we've closed the debate, so all those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you, that's everyone. Councillor Hunter, if you'd like to just go out the front there or something. Moving to item 6.3, planning proposal, Highway Service Centre, Murrum Bateman. Do I have a mover? Mover, Councillor Frost, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Burgess. Does anyone wish to speak for or against this? As I think it explains, it's going through to Gateway, so it's actually not a DA at this point. This is a conceptual rezoning of land for a possible service station down the track. Councillor Jones.
Madam Mayor, before I speak to the issue, I wanted to ask a question of the Acting Director. What if we reject the recommendation to forward this to Gateway on the basis that it doesn't, it's not a match with our current zoning, and that it doesn't really address the issue of servicing the traffic flow post Barton Highway bypass?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the applicant would have the recourse of seeking a pre-gateway review if we were to refuse that, and that would go directly to Department of Planning, and that would be involved in that decision. The other way to address this concern that you have about the detailed design work and the traffic work not being done is essentially what staff are going to be doing and requiring that prior to consultation with the RMS.
Madam Mayor, in that case, I'd like to speak against the recommendation. Do we actually have it moved yet?
I've got a mover and a seconder.
Thank you, sorry. Yep. I'd like to speak against this. I think the area is quite sensitive, and while I respect staff's opinion that the precedent of bounding is applicable, I would respectfully object to that, because I don't believe that it is a match with what's happening on the highway with bounding. I believe that there are some sensitive industries surrounding it, such as wineries, bed and breakfasts, and residential areas. And I'm concerned that this is going to also impact on Yass itself, because it's in an awkward position somewhere between Murrum Bateman and Yass in a 15-minute approach to Yass. What does that do to our jobs here in Yass? What does that do to the jobs that are currently there in Murrum Bateman in terms of servicing the petrol stations there? I acknowledge that there isn't a large parking area for rests at Murrum Bateman, but we are yet to finalise our Murrum Bateman overall master plan, and that could come out of that, a suitable rest area. So I'm loath to send a message to the state government that, without making comment, that this is something that we want to see proceeded. So I would prefer that we reject the proposal, and should they want to pursue it on its merits with the department, they can do so.
Anybody else wish to speak for or against it? Yep. Councillor Turner.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I must say I read through this with a certain amount of fear and trepidation. I'm enormously concerned primarily on the biosecurity issues. The current service centres don't have those issues. If they're a stock park, they're isolated, if you like, from any of the rural activities around them. It is an area of rural significance. I'm concerned that we at this stage don't know where the second lane is going to go, whether this is going to wind up in between two lanes of traffic. Whether it goes ahead or doesn't go ahead, and I appreciate at this stage that we're actually only talking about allowing it in the RU1 zone for this particular place. Its water access is by virtue of an easement being granted by the landowners. What happens if that land is sold? Is that an easement in perpetuity? There are a number of issues that just give me concern. And I support Councillor Jones in the fact that, okay, if they want to go through another channel, that's fine. But I believe that we need to be able to keep our fingers on this. And I would understand that everything that happens from here on in will come back to council for their approval. But I'm just concerned that there's a lack of detail in the proposal. And I'm concerned for the citizens of Murrumbateman and the citizens of Yass. I can't see anyone driving from Yass going 15 minutes down the road to fill up with fuel. It seems to be the most extraordinary place, unless it's going to be competitive. And if we've got a 12-cent disparity between one service centre and Yass now, is it going to have another 12 cents further down the track? That'd be absolutely wonderful. But in the meantime, I'm uncomfortable with the proposal as it stands.
Councillor Frost is going to speak. Does anyone else wish to speak for or against it before he does? Because he'll close the debate. Okay, Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, this is it is inconsistent with the way that we've approached not only Bowling, but we also approached the proposal to expand or to renew, I think, at the current site outside of Yass. In both cases, we didn't say, oh, look, we don't think you've got enough. You know, we don't think you've got enough custom to justify it, because that's not our job. No, we're not here to manage be a government to manage an economy. That's the decisions that they make, and they make those assessments. What we're doing is simply allow a process to begin. It is going to come back to us. In terms of the amount of employment that may come back to here, yes, it may actually reduce slightly what goes on out of Yass. It may actually increase it. I would suggest it increase it overall if it does do that. And the point being that the one at Yass doesn't cater for us anymore. You go on Easter weekend, there are people lined up for miles back there. It's just not big enough. This is just someone offering to expand our infrastructure so we can take advantage of that all the time. So it's first stage. I understand the concerns that we might have. There's all sorts of concerns we might have. And they haven't done the detail. Why haven't they done the detail? Because who wants to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars getting that detail together to have council say, no, we'll do that first. So we're getting our first look. In principle, all those things can be solved, and they will be by the time if and when it goes ahead. So let's go with it. Let's work with these people, and let's see if we can expand and get some more industry into this area.
All right, thank you, Councillor Frost. I'll put it to the vote now. All those in favour?
All right.
Sorry, all those in favour. Oh, whoops.
Sorry.
So that's I can see Councillor Frost, Councillor Burgess, Councillor Abbey, Councillor Reid, and
Councillor Fury.
Councillor Ferry. I can't see his hand. That's also you need.
No, I'm sorry. I'm declaring against.
Okay, that's all right. No, I'm just double checking. Thank you. So we've got the fours and councillor, you're against? No. Yes, that's okay. All those against? Councillor Furry, just already declared, Councillor Jones and Councillor Turner. Thank you. Motion 1. Thank you. Would you like to invite Councillor Harker back? Councillor McManus can't get his Zoom working, so I'm going to call him and put him on the speaker. Hang on. Michael, it's Rowena. Abby?
I'm trying to fire up Zoom and I can't get it to work.
Righto, that's all right. You're now on loudspeaker in the council chambers, so we can continue with that if you're happy to just go by phone.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Thank you. So we've just gone through items 6.1, 6.2 and 6.3. We're just moving to 6.4, development application, Horse Arena, Macintosh Circuit, Murrum Bateman. There is a recommendation here. Do I have a mover? Councillor Jones and Councillor Harker. Does anyone wish to speak for or against it?
Madam Mayor, just I want to acknowledge that in approving this, we're actually setting a precedent. So as we all have discovered that there are larger horse arenas in the locality, but the zoning is different. And while that nuance may be lost on the community, at this point in time, when we approve this one, we're now setting a precedent which now can be referred back to in terms of what this council believes is an acceptable size for horse arenas in this particular zoning. So I know it was a painful process for the applicant, and I appreciate their patience and bringing back a new proposal for us to consider.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wish to speak for or against it? I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour?
Aye. Aye.
That's Councillor McManus.
Aye.
Thank you. That's everyone. We'll move to the Director of Infrastructure and Assets report. Again, there's five items. I think we'll just walk through all 5. 7.1, Main Street, Yass, footpath replacement. We have a recommendation in front of us.
I just want to adjust it from March 2020 budget review process, unless you have a TARDIS.
You referred to the...
I just put quarter of budget.
Yep.
Thank you.
All
It's
right.
nothing to do with it's nothing to do with Ross High Street, does it?
No, this is just Main Street. So this is funding and moving trees. We have had some discussion in relation previous to this that there are many street problems, but this one has been identified at a higher priority in terms of it is the only between the curb and the shop fronts is part of the problem with that as well. Do I have a question, Councillor, or would you like to move it with that adjustment to quarterly?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to move it.
Councillor Frost has moved it and seconded by
Seconded.
Councillor
Councillor Ferry.
Could I just ask a question? How are we getting on with the paint? And how long before we've got our all the other ones? I mean, there are other areas that definitely need footpaths, and I think we've discussed various ones. How long before we've actually got the paint redone and we can do this in a more sensible way than just bringing the odd project?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we are attempting to get that review of the PAM through the 2021 budget process. So that's part of that. We'll expedite that as quickly as possible so that we can get to bring a list of projects to council as soon as we can after reviewing that. Now, I can't give you an indication at the moment how long that's going to take because there will need to be some consultation with the community over the contents of that, and that may take longer than we initially expect.
Yes.
Is it possible to have a better arrangement with the concrete around the trees?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we are looking at how, when we plant the new trees, they will be more sustainable in the future, so they don't interrupt the footpath and curb.
Wrong with the trees. The footpath is the problem. The trees are going to get cut down.
No, through you, Madam Mayor, the tree roots are actually pushing up on the bottom of the concrete, and
Taking all the water away from
that is through you, Madam Mayor, that is correct. So we need to actually, and those trees are not suitable for small spaces. They actually need to be a different species of tree, and that's noted in the report. The idea is to take them out and plant them with something that actually moves down into the ground rather than spreads laterally at the surface.
the tree that you're removing is probably the most common street tree in the world.
Yes, you're right, and it's one that causes the most problems to footpaths and curbs and gutter in the world.
And people's sinuses.
Okay. All right, well, we have a recommendation. We have a mover and seconder. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour?
Aye.
Right.
Councillor McManus?
Against.
Righto. Motion carried, and no, Councillor McManus is against it. Thank you. Moving to 7.2, fixing country roads, Shingle Hill Way, grant money. Do I have a mover? Councillor Burgess. Second, Councillor Turner, without any hesitation. Councillor Burgess.
I'd like to move this. I think this is one of the better things that's happened to this crossing straightened up. I just wonder, a question, is the bad bin where the car's praying up above going to be straightened out to in this realignment? Bad bend up above it.
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor, if you look at the plan itself, on page 97 of the agenda, you'll see that the two bends either side are being straightened up.
I just want to make it. It's fine. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else wish to speak for or against it? Councillor Jones.
Yeah, happy to speak in favour of this. And what a great project for us to have successfully got a grant for. Thank you, staff. The process of putting in grants and meeting the timelines for such a small council, we cannot underestimate the load that places on them. And whether it's a $15,000 grant or a $4 million grant, it's the same kind of effort that they have to put in, and I want to acknowledge their hard work. I also want to point out that the calculator starts now on this reduction in our reserves, our development contribution reserve. We're coming out of 5.9, and this is where we start to shave it off in our business papers. And I think at the end of our business paper, we'll be down by about 1.3. And I think it's just really important that we watch what we do as part of this process, because when we apply for grants, there's always something that we have to give. It's very rarely do you get 100% government grant. And so later on, when we do our operational budget, that priority list of our 10 projects couldn't be more important to set in place and for the community to see what our priorities are, because we often get complaints, well, why do we go for this grant or why do we go for that grant? And this is the reason, so that we have 400K to meet the requirements to get a $4 million grant. And so this is really important that we watch how we spend this money, because I don't want to see it going sideways onto projects that were never part of our priority list. And this is a great result, and I'd love to see more of this.
We're working on it. That's all I can say.
The plan's in the bottom of the drawer.
All right. All right, councillors, if there's no further comment, I'll put the motion as it stands. All those in favour?
Aye.
That's unanimous. Thank you. Moving to Walker Park Facilities Upgrade Project.
Moving 7.3, Councillor Ferry, and speaking to.
And speaking to Councillor Ferry, moving. Thank you. And seconding Councillor Harker. Thank you.
I'll second it.
I may just add in there that if we just wanted to, that recommendation, and just note continue to consult with the user groups on the final design.
Yep, I agree to that as the mover.
I'd like to move an amendment along those lines.
Through Madam Mayor, I'm actually happy to accept the amendment as a part of the recommendation.
Thank you.
So the amendment would
Would you like us to read it out?
Councillor McManus, I think there's an alternate motion that actually includes what you're after. We're just trying to get that. We're just trying to get that up at the moment for everybody.
Oh,
Well, I'm still going up the paper report, so I'm miles behind everybody.
Yeah, that's all right. We're just trying to get it up at the moment.
But while it's coming up,
Here we go.
I'll wait till Nathan speaks.
Yeah, look, the revised motion, if you like, is that the 400,000 be allocated from the Developer Contributions Reserve to construct the revised grandstand, a new mobility impaired amenities building and associated access. And part two being that the users of the proposed facility be consulted on the revised design prior to any planning and building approvals being issued.
Was that along the lines that you were also thinking, Councillor McManus?
It also, does that still mean it comes back to council, final design?
The final design? Not necessarily, I don't think.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm happy to bring back the final design to council if it so wishes.
Okay.
I'd like us to this. I'll just, Nathan, you speaking.
Yeah, I will speak, Michael. But as the mover, once again, I'm happy to, through Madam Mayor, I'm happy to include a third point, if necessary, that the final design comes back to council for decision. Okay, I'll speak if that saves time. So, look,
yes.
the Councillor Ferry here. I just wanted to, of course, thank the staff for their work. First off, secondly, this is a great result. This is a great result for Walker Park, and it reiterates the importance of this facility, not just locally for our sports clubs and associations, but also regionally. And I know in previous discussions we've referred to, of course, the Raiders looking at this facility in the past. So I think this is a really great win for Walker Park, and really reiterates it being a regional asset for everyone.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak for or against it?
I think it's important that we give ourselves one last chance at trying to get the final design that suits all parties. So it's not just Rugby League. If Yass Rugby Union was to play a final or a significant match in Yass, this would be where you would play. If the soccer club was to get a game above just the normal club games, this would be where you would play it. We need to run it past certainly the Rugby League, and they can contact the ACT Rugby League. But also we need to be talking to the rugby club and the soccer club. Now, primarily it has to be set up that suits rugby league, and at the moment, as good as the design is, it's still not exactly what they want. I would hate to spend $500,000. I would spend $500,000 and then find out that we're still not eligible for finals or for significant gains.
Through Madam Mayor,
there's a third part. So you, I think Nathan possibly can see it, but there's a third part that says the final design is reported back to council for approval.
In the meantime, it would be very handy if we could run this past back to the rugby league, the ACT, and they can set up the ACT rugby league at the same time that we invite the soccer club and the rugby union club. This is not a facility that only rugby league will use. Although rugby league and touch football are there at the moment, the other clubs, if ever they're fortunate enough to extend themselves, this will be where they'll extend themselves to.
Through Madam Mayor, can I just respond to that as the mover? I think it's really important.
Close the debate.
Not if it's if it's in response.
No.
Can't do it.
Okay, that's fine. I just think we need to consult Sports Council. That's the appropriate thing to do here.
I think they can actually have that discussion with them. If you take the final designs reported back, I think everyone's noting that they need to discuss it with the potential users and sporting groups of the Yass Valley.
Yeah.
That's how I'm reading that.
That doesn't have to be 6 or 8 weeks. It can be relatively quick.
Yes.
To make sure it happens and we get it built, because now's the time. We're going to build anything. Now's the time to build it.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Ferry, as the mover?
Madam Mayor, I'm happy with that. But as I've just said, the Sports Council contains all of those codes as I understand it. So I think that's the first place. But yes, I'm happy.
Well, it's one of them places, I think. Yep.
Yeah.
I think it's with all of them. I take the point. So he's actually closed the debate now. So I'll put it to a vote. All those in favour?
Aye.
That's everyone. Thank you. Moving to the tender evaluation Gundaroo Amenities Building. The recommendation is for it to go to confidential because it's closed to the public because it discloses or potentially prejudices commercial position of the persons who supplied the information. So if I could have a mover and a seconder, Councillor Burgess, Councillor Harker, thank you. All of those in favour?
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
That's everyone. Moving to 7.5, Yass River Road Future Works Topography Survey. Councillor Harker, question?
Yes, question, please. I have a question to the director. From my understanding, we haven't seen a survey of this type on any other road come to council. Is that correct? I note the mention of Nanama Road and Yass Valley Way. May have undergone a similar survey.
Through you, Madam Mayor, normally these sorts of surveys are undertaken as part of the work, the actual construction of these sorts of roads. The intention of this survey is to gain an understanding of what we currently physically have on the ground along the entire length, so we can bring back to council some determinations on what projects may or may not be suitable to upgrade that road to a suitable standard.
Okay. So just in line with that questioning, just conscious, of our job in terms of questioning any large financial transactions. Are there any other ways of doing this? So is there like a Rolls-Royce version A, a B, a C that might be worth considering along with this option?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the price, the value that we've got is based upon the competitive survey tendering process that we went through on Nanama and Yass Valley Way. So we believe this is the best outcome. There are other ways of doing surveys. Drones are now used to undertake surveys of roads. They generally are reasonably accurate, but not for design purposes. They tend to be more expensive, and you actually have to get some special approvals to drive a drone over the top of a public road these days. And so there are ways of doing it. The other way is to do a visual inspection, but that doesn't again give us the technical detail that we need to do to undertake this particular design, especially when it comes to using this information later on down the track, because I don't expect that Yass River Road is going to undertake significant change over the next 10 or 15 years, and so we should be able to use this particular survey for some time to develop our designs and undertake the works we need to. So we actually are doing future work on this particular road to inform us as to where those projects need to be.
So just confirming with that question, does that mean that if there wasn't, would there be an option of saying you coming back to us with, okay, we know this option's on the table, 2 or 3 other options that may have a different monetary value associated with them?
Through you, Madam Mayor, not to do the entire, I mean, we could come back and look at drones, but they would take some time because we'd have to make sure that we can get the approvals because they're not approved by council. They're approved by state government in relation to drones over roads. And that may take us some time. And I said, from my initial investigations into using drone technology in other jurisdictions, it's more expensive.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the topographical information is like giving you base information to allow you to develop different design options, which is probably what's more of an issue is in terms of do we have a Rolls-Royce standard road or do we have a Holland Kingswood standard road?
Yeah.
I think that comes out of the same base information. Yeah. So that this topographical information is used regardless of what options you develop in terms of the standard of the road.
So, it's not about the design of the road, it's simply about the information, the structure and where the road is in relation to the road reserve and how wide the road reserve is and where the services are. It doesn't talk about the design of the road itself. That's a different process.
Okay. And one last question, if I may. Is there any, are there any plans for other roads to be done on a similar scope? Is this the precedent as in the first one we're looking at doing, and will there be others that would also have a similar topographical survey?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the intention is that we would look at strategic roads to do this sort of work. Murray Bateman Road leads itself to this sort of survey. There are other roads in our council area which also would lead itself to doing this. These sort of surveys are done like it's similar to what the RMS have done along Barkin Highway. You understand what is there and then you take sort of design on top of it, rather than try to design on the go as we've been doing in the past and in some instances getting it horribly wrong in the pricing structure.
Through Madam Mayor, perhaps we could take it on notice that we bring back a report that identifies those strategic roads, so that we can say, well, these are the roads that we think that need this type of work being done to get us in a good position. So if there's grant funding opportunities, that we've got some of the work ready to go.
Yeah, I think that would be really great because I think part of the question from the community will be what is your strategy around this and why are you spending this level of money on that particular road, and there needs to be a clear strategic direction and understanding of the outcome of our spending $250,000 on a road.
And through you, maybe that is the intention that as we develop the road, redevelop the road asset strategy, that this particular issue would be raised within that.
I think certainly it would be quite helpful to have a list of proposed roads that we're going to do this over a period of time. Yep. Right.
How much is our total construction budget each year?
Pretty Madam Mayor, it depends on grant funding, but it's around $3 million.
And that's council road, or does that include things like Murray Bateman Road, which is now road?
That doesn't include regional roads, which we get funding for independently.
Okay.
I'm just struggling with this one, Madam Mayor, in that we're going to spend $250,000. When you would spend, ideally, you would spend $250,000 if you were going to spend $20 million over 3 or 4 years doing up that road. The chances of us ever getting any more than $500,000 to do up that road are fairly limited. And it's not a through road. Unfortunately, it's Councillor Burgess. It only services the local landholders, and there's a back way to Gundaroo. It's not a road that we would be in a position ever to spend $5 or $10 million. I'm really struggling with why we would do a survey on that road of $250,000 when we know we'll never have $5 million or $3 million to spend on it. It doesn't. We've never had a windfall on any other road. We couldn't even get, in 25 years, we couldn't even get the state government to come up with grants to pay for the Wee Jasper Road. Councillor Joseph, we've had a windfall there on Shingle Hill, which is a state here's $10 million going to do your country roads. We have to raise our rates to get money just to do bridges. I'm really struggling with $250,000. As good as it would, as handy as it would be, when we don't have the money at the end of it to do anything about developing it. So all we end up doing is raising expectations.
Okay, Councillor Manus, if you could just stay on hold, there's a couple of other councillors wish to speak as well. Councillor Jones, and then, no, you're right, Councillor Jones and Councillor Frost, and I can't see the other two.
Madam Mayor, I would like to support the recommendation to spend the $250,000. And as much as it hurts us to let go any money that's not actually on resealing or gravel or anything like that.
If someone's going to move a recommendation.
Moving the recommendation, beg your pardon.
And I need a seconder. The recommendation.
Aye.
Mike.
Yep.
Thank you. Discussion.
Yep.
We've all cringed when projects that we've been responsible for have costed more money because they've had to be redone, fixed. Our reputation has fallen dramatically over jobs on roads that haven't been done to the standard that our community expects. How do we lift that bar? How do we create better roads that last longer? We take the advice of our Director of Engineering with decades worth of experience on roads. And to have this opportunity to actually understand a road from the beginning and the end allows us to choose where we spend the money on the build when we actually build it, instead of just kilometre after kilometre. I think we've all seen the idea of why continue to do something the same way year after year and not have any improvement in how we spend the money and making that money stretch further. While this is a significant outlay, the opportunities that I can see here for new funding, new grants that are on our horizon are significant. And I'll actually wind up by asking a question of the Director to talk to us about the new space that we find ourselves in terms of the government looking to us as councils to identify roads that they might consider to repossess. Thank you.
Discussion's only just begun. They've only just appointed the committee to even look at.
And what other grant opportunities there might be?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we live in some strange times where the federal government has obviously committed funds to a range of different opportunities for the community. My sense of the reading of the federal and state government is that they will be looking for more targeted responses to their funding opportunities for people to be, as they term in state government, shovel-ready projects, looking for things to happen as quickly as they possibly can. This sort of work puts us in the opportunity, puts us in the space of preparing for those opportunities when they occur. Without it, we will be scrambling to undertake or take advantage of anything of that nature that occurs.
Councillor Frost, I think you wanted to speak.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wonder why we're doing a whole road and nowhere else. When I first came here, there was we're not short of strategies about, not short of roads that need fixing, and we're not short of identifying them. When I first came here, we had a long-term strategy basically to bitumen the Wargula Road up through to what's now Hilltop there. That stopped because we didn't have the funds. We have similar sorts of things with other roads. The road to the Oolong Road, there's work on that happened on Black Range, so on. We've got all those sort of ones. But this is just taking one road, which is not a through road. Effectively, I don't believe it's a through road. It's a road that a lot of people live on, but not many people start at the roundabouts and end up at Gundaroo. They tend to come in off other roads, and it may even be those other roads that are high priority. So I have trouble a little bit like Councillor McManus understanding why we're spending so much time trying to identify risks. I don't think we've got that. I don't think you necessarily have the right problem. But I'm willing to be convinced, but I just don't understand why we would do one whole road that's not a through road and not do any work on those other roads.
Councillor Burgess.
I personally think it's a waste of money, $250,000. Just I'd sooner have some bitumen seal on the road with that $250,000. Fix up or up the zigzags and straighten it out with a bulldozer. Because it's all been fenced after the fires there in 95, where you could just straighten it right up. I just think, and with this virus around, I don't think there'll be much money around because the governments will be broke. That's what I think.
So you're speaking against the motion.
Yes.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak for or against the motion? The only thing I'd like to maybe make a suggestion that that we look at a group of roads, and what was suggested earlier is whether we want to defer this and actually get the list of priorities of the roads and the sections of the roads, and maybe have that conversation before we allocate this sort of money. And it might be over, I know it doesn't give you a whole of road approach, and I understand that and I accept that. It doesn't give us as good maybe overall look, but it may be that that dollar amount's still spent, but maybe across a couple of parts of
roads.
Yes. So I know there is a recommendation, so I'm going to actually suggest, not that I like to move them from the chair, that we have a foreshadowed. Am I foreshadowing?
It's been moved and second, unless the mover and seconder agree to an adjustment.
Okay.
I think the spirit, Madam Mayor,
You're closing the debate. So just
I'm
before,
actually going to suggest
okay.
an amendment. It's probably going to be a bit of a stretch, but we'll see if it flies.
It's not an amendment.
Oh, it's her motion.
It's a motion.
Yeah.
Still crafting the motion.
Yeah, hold on.
But it's let it close.
So, Madam Mayor, you're saying, so instead of the entire length, we say for.
Well, we get the priorities brought back to us as to how it should be spent. So just Councillor Jones is looking to amend the motion briefly. Just let's hear what that says first.
Council calls for a report back with a priority list of roads for consideration of topographic survey, including Yass Valley Way.
Yes, right.
Rats River.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Right.
Yes,
Road, sorry.
So
that's down looking for the.
So councillors, if you can't see this, I'm just going to read out. This is, and Councillor Reid will also have to agree to it if for a starting point before we can vote on it. So the words are that council calls for a report back with a priority list of roads for consideration of topographical surveys probably that should be, I'm thinking, surveys including Yass River.
Surveys, yeah.
Including Yass River Road. Are you amenable to that, Councillor Reid?
I am, yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So
we can still allocate in the budget.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Councillor McManus.
Is the 250 still being allocated in the budget? Because that's the big. So we've changed where we're going to spend the money. We're thinking of changing where we're still going to put in the budget. That's the bottom line. So that has to go in there somewhere.
Yeah, so you could have it in two parts. That council calls for the report, and then second that that $250,000 be included in the 2021 budget for topographical survey work. Okay.
Yep.
And that leaves us for further conversations with the director to ensure that we're doing our duty as well as he's doing his in terms of how that we've got funding allocated and how it works. What the priorities are. Okay. So if we just delete that bottom piece there. Thanks, Drew. All right, so that's moved by Councillor Jones, seconded by Councillor Reid. Just have a quick read of it and see if it makes sense. Including Yass River Road and Development Contribution Reserve budget for those works. Okay. All right, I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour?
Aye.
Councillor Berry, yes. Councillor McManus?
Including Yass River Road after the priority list of roads.
Councillor McManus?
I still don't want to do the survey, but I think that's a better outcome. Going ahead.
So are you voting for it or against it, Councillor?
Voting against.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Reid's obviously voting for it. So motion carried, noting that Councillor McManus voted against it. Thank you. Right, moving to the Director of Corporate and Community Reports, rates arrears. This is a report for noting. It's just updating us on where the rates, assessments and payments are up to. Can I have a mover and seconder for that? Councillor Frost, thank you. Seconded, Councillor Turner, thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Yep, that's everyone, thank you. Moving to 8.2, the investment and borrowing report. If I may, well, I'll ask for a mover and seconder, and then I have a question if I could. Councillor Hyker, Councillor Frost, thank you. I just had a question to the Director in relation to he and his team have been working quite hard to renegotiate the T Corp loan rate, and I'm just wondering if you'd had any further feedback or success. We hope.
Yeah, yes, Madam Mayor. In fact, we followed up with T Corp a second time today because the initial answer was no, they wouldn't let us refinance this loan, and we got a definite no today from T Corp and being able to refinance that NAB loan that's due for revision in 23. So at this stage, it looks like we're stuck with it until the revision date of 2023, otherwise suffer the $1 million penalty.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you for at least trying very hard to see if we could claw back some of that funding.
Yeah.
Do I have a mover and seconder? I think I do already. Yes, I do. Councillor Harker and Councillor Frost. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That's everyone.
Yep.
Moving to 2.8.3, the draft operational plan. This is to go on public exhibition. Do I have a mover and seconder first, and then questions?
Yep. Second.
If I could,
Moved, Councillor Reid. I heard. I think.
No, which.
Yep.
Got it on tab.
so
Sorry.
I've got a
I've
got a bit of a thing.
Sorry, Councillor Reid. There's a draft, another worded resolution that is being suggested, which is now in front of us.
Okay.
Right.
Councillors, if you can just bear with me as we go through what's changed on that recommendation. So the alternate motion is that yes, it be placed on public exhibition, and two, the staged installation of solar generated electricity for council facilities be added to the infrastructure planning priorities. And that brings us up to a nice neat 10 priority projects. And three, a report on modelling of a 400k loan against the OLG benchmarks for financial sustainability being prepared for council's consideration on the staged installation of solar electricity generating facilities at council facilities. And four, I think one that we can all relate to, since in the recent item regarding footpaths, we all had at least 10 in our mind that we could say also needed addressing. We really do need to, I think, set a precedent and put 50k be added to the 2020-2021 operational plan for new footpaths, and a program of priority works be brought back for council for consideration. And when I say for new footpaths, I also mean like asset management. So not just going out and doing new ones, actually maintaining what we have and looking at where there's greatest need for new. Why do we need to add these? It's just slipped off our priority list. I think there was a bit of confusion over where that the first project for solar infrastructure would come from. My understanding, it might come from the sewage works fund, but we do need to prioritise that as part of to actually see it come to fruition. And while we do have a review of the camp coming, I think just like the issue of weeds, we know we're in charge of that asset, so we should be setting a budget for it. And this budget will be a legacy for the next council to come along, and I'd rather like to see them not have to fight to get money in the budget. I'd also like to acknowledge that we are continuing our moratorium on library overdue fees. I think it's very important at this time of great upheaval that our community is encouraged to borrow, even under the circumstances that we find ourselves in. Our council was one of the first to come up with an innovative way for people to click and collect their books. And I would hate to see families, especially in this environment of homeschooling, not feel like they can borrow because of the concern that they might have with overdue fees should they arise. I also like to acknowledge the freeze on the membership of the family passes for the pool, and that we're continuing to keep that as it was in the last budget.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a seconder for that recommendation?
Yep.
Okay.
Also.
All right. I'll let Councillor Reid have it.
Question, that's all right.
A question, Councillor Harker.
Well, it's more an adjustment. Just reading through on page 188 of the draft operational plan, where we talk about our environment, we've just mentioned a department that has been superseded by another department. The Office of Environment and Heritage is now, to my understanding, Department of Primary Industry and Environment. So it's a wording update.
It's
what goes out on.
Yeah, they still use OLG. It's a department within the department.
A giant depot.
Yeah, we can fix it.
Yes, depot. I just don't use them.
Yeah, we can fix that. I think Councillor Ferry also had a number of similar suggestions that we've said that we would fix those up before exhibition.
Question, Councillor Jones.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I think it's important that we as councillors discuss this issue. The elephant in the room is the COVID-19 situation, and I wanted to ask the General Manager, where are we at the greatest risk, and what is resilient in our budget in terms of delivery? If we don't get enough rates, how is our liquidity in terms of maintaining our staff wages and projects that we have planned? So in essence, how does COVID-19 affect our budget?
The great unknown. If I had a crystal ball, I've got to be able to say this is the sort of likely impacts. It's I think I'd probably retire with a knighthood or something like that. But no, I think that the difficulty we've got is that the landscape is changing so rapidly that it's difficult to predict what will happen. For instance, we have known in the past that federal governments make decisions on FAG grants about whether they pay us in advance or not pay us in advance, and that has an impact on our cash flow. And while we've managed to get through those, generally what we've done with those type of changes is deal with them as they occur, rather than try to predict and put into the budget what our response is going to be. And look, that part of the reason for us preparing a budget based on business as usual, but in a separate report tonight, we've got a hardship policy, an expanded hardship policy to deal with the sorts of hiccups that we might likely face with the downturn in the economy as a result of the virus. So I think we've tried to find that sort of balance from a business as usual, mechanisms in place to deal with, and I think at the workshop we did suggest maybe a big mini budget summit type arrangement that might be able to deal with things as they become clearer, and also an expanded hardship policy are the sorts of things that we look at. The parts of the budget I think that we're going to least suffer from are things like fee for service. So if people need the service and they're paying it, that's going to be the income. it's only if there's a downturn in the economy, so we don't have as many people building things, for instance, then it's expected that we will see a downturn in the number of DAs and development applications and the like. But again, while the industry is still buoyant in that regard, we can expect the income to maintain there. If we get a rush of people looking to defer their rates or defaulting on payment of rates, then yes, that's going to be an impact on our cash flow, because roughly speaking, 50% of our income is dependent on those incomes. So that's the sort of broad picture. So I think we've got to, and certainly this is consistent with other councils across the region, is that we're preparing a budget as normal, but we're all dealing with the issues that, or not trying to second guess all the issues coming out, but having mechanisms in place to deal with them as that information becomes available. I think that's probably a wise approach to take in my mind, so that we can adjust. And look, the adjustments are occurring daily. In fact, just before I came in here, there's another 2 proclamations being made about for planning issues, and that's sort of the norm that we're in at the moment. It is a bit of a challenge. I'm not sure if you want to add anything further, Mark.
Yeah, look, I might just chime in and add something a bit more specific in light of the question. And page 78 of the operational plan certainly has our ratios, and the one you need to look at there is the cash expense cover ratio with a benchmark of 3 months. We have a current in our budget 8.85, so that means for the best part of 9 months. That's with no cash coming in, so that's a complete stop of any cash coming in. We're not going to be in that situation. So even if you say took 10% of our income out, or even 20%, we're looking at going for a good couple of years in being able to pay for things. And I guess by that stage, we'd be lobbying and looking for other sources and trying to work through a bit like Fit for the Future. So I'm fairly confident we're in a situation similar. And to be honest, ahead of tonight, just to give myself a benchmark from my old place, that situation is even similar to City of Sydney.
And through you, Madam Mayor, Director of Finance, Mark Eddy, just quick question regarding our budgets, predicted budget surplus of 570. In light of the environment, should we expect that is that will be a true figure, or are we expecting that not to be realised?
Well, I think realistically, I think you'd be conservative if you said if you knocked that down to 0. Yeah.
Councillor Harker.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. I suppose just on Councillor Jones's comment, I think if you guys remember when we were back in 2016, we asked for liquidity models to come in, and we were sitting at just over 3 months, and we looked at the industry and we said, actually, we don't want to be there, we want to be 7 months. So I just wanted to say, I think congratulations, because it's exactly why we've done these liquidity models, and that is a really healthy situation to be in, let alone if you can achieve the forecast for 2030. It's such a healthy operation, so it's to protect us from unpredictable things like this.
If I might just add on a conversation in the last 24 hours, local government's one of the places that a lot of money hasn't been spent yet, but my understanding is that there is funding coming to help support local council and local business process. So it's not just the local businesses. They've been looking at businesses, but that's, as I understand from a joint organisation point of view, that's what I have been advised. But we don't know what it is yet. We don't have details, but there is additional funding coming for local government.
Madam Mayor, can I speak against Councillor Ferry?
Councillor Ferry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, look, I'm speaking against the recommendation from the perspective more so of the actual draft operation plan. In particular, I feel that one of the concerns mostly is that councillors were given somewhat limited visibility to commit feedback to this document, and that's from a strategic and whole of community perspective. We as councillors actually form the face of this organisation. We're the elected representatives, and we need to be involved in this document because it aligns with those strategic values and objectives, and it needs to be reflective before it goes out to public exhibition. I don't think it's fair that our community should be expected to potentially, at this point, to go through financial spreadsheets to identify what might come out in 2020, 2021. It's supposed to be a delivery plan. And I think that we're going to get submissions to that effect from the community in the coming weeks. Just to wrap up that, I think the concerns that I've raised, obviously, before this meeting, which is that there appears to be a lack of content around what was actually delivered in the previous operational plan, and measurements against what was delivered and not delivered. Additionally, we refer to this document, and as you'll see in the papers, we draw back to the delivery plan, yet the majority of the document's actually referring back to measurements within the CSP and the CSP itself. Tonight, we've heard from both Councillor Jones and Councillor Harker asking key questions and actually giving feedback as we go. I don't think that's okay, from a sense that this should have been brought out earlier. The final thing I think as well is we need to be mindful that, like many other regional communities, we actually have a reduction in our local media. The exposure that is gained from local media is reducing for particular reasons, which I won't go into detail. And we have a really important responsibility as an organisation to actually communicate what we're attempting to do for our community. I think that's a big issue. And I think we also have a concern with some of the measurements of the CSP. I'll leave it there, but my intent is to raise a submission. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak for or against the resolution? Councillor Jones, would you like to close it?
I'll close it. I'd just like to accept the feedback from Councillor Furry, and I'd also like to, I guess, point to what we probably should have discussed as well as a result of the COVID-19, how do we get this message out? So staff are going to have to be quite innovative in how we deliver our roadshow over the net, as it were, to try and reach out to our community to seek that feedback. This is not worth its salt unless we've taken it to the community and asked their opinion and tweaked it so that we're getting this right. And now more than ever, I think their feedback is going to be, critically important when it's such a, we're going to have to be very agile in this space in getting this community feedback. So we are going to go out with an engagement process, but it's going to look quite different from what our communities expect. And I actually think we're going to get more engagement than we had before. I've been to community roadshow meetings in Yass where we've had a total of 3 people turn up. And so if we have to find new ways as part of this COVID process, I hope we actually keep them post-COVID-19 as well. If it means that we find new ways to interact with our community. I hear what Councillor Furry is saying about wanting to have as the final budget of a succession of 4, what have been our achievements, what has been left undone, and what do we still need to achieve in this next 12 months. But in defence of our operational budget, I would also like to pull out the fact that we have identified 10 priority projects in terms of infrastructure, which apart from the business as usual in terms of our other services, and I think a slight rise in some fees, it's important to pull those out for the community to see. So I hope as part of the community engagement, they do get to see what are the 10 major infrastructure projects we are looking at for our community, because they are as diverse as our community, from Murray Bateman Community Hall to the Yass War Memorial Swimming Pool redevelopments, to some of the things that have been coming through over our last 3 years, which includes things like bike park for our community and for our families. So there will be things that come out during that consultation process, which I hope address councillors' various concerns.
Okay, councillors, on that note, all those in favour?
Yes,
Sorry, councillor McManus.
Jasmine, I couldn't quite hear Jasmine, but she did include the electricity silent.
Yes, that's included in that
That's
draft one that came out. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, all those in favour?
Right.
Aye.
Yes. All those against? Councillor Ferry, are you against or?
No, I just stated aye. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Oh, you just spoke to me. Thank you. Okay, so that's everyone. And we will have further feedback to all of us once hopefully we've got some engagement back from the community. Moving to 8.4 draft financial hardship policy, Councillor Frost.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor, what I'd like to do.
Seconded, councillor, but I think he just wants to make a slight change to the recommendation.
Yeah, I don't want to make a change to the recommendation. I want to make a change to the actual policy, if that's possible. And certainly we've got a bit before.
Yep.
There are a couple of small changes, and my concern is that this policy might actually reduce the amount of hardship we can offer rather than increase it. I don't think that's the intention, and I think that's what I suggest we do is make a couple of changes that ensure that the three changes that I would make, if you look at eligibility, the eligibility section of there, and the last paragraph talks about financial, where it says where a property owner relies on financial support due to, that implies that you must be part of that list of A, B, C, D, E. What I propose is that we change that as financial support due to circumstances such as. And that means that it can be, yes, that's an indicative list, but other things can be included. I would also remove two words from that list. One is the illness suggested only chronic illness, and I would suggest we take chronic out, so it can be any sort of illness. A broken leg will obviously put somebody in, it could put somebody in hardship, but it wouldn't be included as chronic illness. And simply, if we take widespread out of the disruptive event, and the thought that comes there is if we had a bushfire, it might not be described as a bushfire or a flood, is a disruptive event. We may want to actually provide assistance under that, but it's not widespread. I think the thought about that last one was the current COVID, but yes, that would be covered as well. So there are three small changes, I think, which just open it up again so that we don't, the amount of, I guess my overall concern about the hardship policy for the purposes that the General Manager was talking about before is that the Act actually doesn't give us a lot of scope for giving out hardship and giving relief in terms of hardship. And I certainly wouldn't want to give it any more. So I'll be very much looking forward to seeing what state government has to say about that. But one of the things that we may want to do, well, I wonder how much support under our hardship policy we could give to some of the businesses, for example, that simply had to close down. Certainly the beauticians or even some of the restaurants and so on. I'm not sure that we can actually give very much support under the hardship policy. So I think we're going to have to think a little bit harder than just the hardship policy as a mechanism for us providing support to some of our business. And I look forward to that. I think we can work that through and
Yeah, through Madam Mayor, that one of the legislative basis for hardship is only about rates. Effectively, it's not, and pension rebates. It's not about all the other fees and charges that we apply. So when I talk about we expanding the hardship arrangements, it's getting away from just the legislative requirements, which will be certainly a component of any hardship, and then the other matters would be more the fees and charges that may be. So, for instance, the beautician that's closed down and is not operating would not need to pay for an inspection fee for council because they're not operating. It would just seem silly for us to charge a fee when they're not using.
Unfortunately, they were under the legislation were still obliged to charge the rates.
Yes,
and as much as we can do is not having, we can forgo the interest on it if they're not paid.
That's
Forgo
right.
The interest for a while, but it's fairly minimal. So, anyway, I commend it with those changes.
I have a seconder, Councillor Turner.
I just have a quick question about the evolution of what we were just discussing. How do we get to a point where we actually have a COVID-19 recovery strategy for our community that we actually, discuss with our local businesses and councillors? What is our next step to get us to that point where we can have that conversation? As difficult as it is to meet in person, I think it's important we figure out what we can do to dovetail into whatever's coming down from federal and state.
So I'm going to just add to that the government has provided a whole lot of measures for private business. They haven't actually provided any support for council to do anything yet, which is what I was referring to in that conversation.
Thank you.
It wasn't us to assist businesses further because the government's actually providing that funding direct. We don't want to get in the way of funds that they can access directly through the programs that are outlined from federal and state. What I was referring to was potentially supporting some of the stuff that council does that may be able to create jobs or do other things. I don't actually know the details. I'm just aware from the Office of Local Government Minister's Office has advised me.
Our COVID-19 strategy at the moment is one of progressive escalation, depending on our particular circumstances. So, confirmed cases within our LGA or our region, confirmed cases within our organisation, multiple cases within our organisation is sort of the extreme. But so we've got the policy that talks about progressive escalation. We've actually put in our policy, if you like, the idea of a recovery plan, but that was left deliberately blank at this stage because we didn't know how long it was going for. Now, the governments are starting to talk about recovery plans. In fact, we as an executive management team talked about that this morning, about how do we, if we progressively escalate, how do we progressively de-escalate? And again, what are the triggers for that? So we're starting to think about it. But again, we're sort of taking a bit of a lead from the higher levels of government because they're the ones that often set the legal framework for us to operate within. So we're keeping an eye on it, but it is on our agenda to actually do and look at how we could actually de-escalate from where we are at the present time.
Thank you. All right, councillors, putting that policy to the vote. All those in favour? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, that's everyone. All right, moving to general manager reports. There aren't any this council meeting. Notice of motion, there aren't any questions on the notice. There aren't any. There's minutes and recommendations of council committee. Minutes of the Audit Risk Improvement Committee 31st of March 2020, which again was held by Zoom. So it's just this report be noted. If I can get a move and second to the noting. Councillor Harker, thank you.
Seconded.
Councillor Frost, thank you. No, you don't want to note noting it?
Seconded, Councillor Furry.
Councillor Furry, thank you. Yes.
I suppose wanted to hopefully progress. Want to make the council aware that something came up in the papers that I'd encourage you to go back and read, and it was the proposed framework moving forward for this committee that's been recommended, I think, by the Office of Local Government. It's not a decision of this or this council, and it basically the recommendation is that councillors are no longer part of the commission. So it's pure, it's independent, and I suppose it raised a flag with me in terms of this connectivity back to this council, and I think it's, and it obviously did with the mayor, and I think it's something that we need to either give feedback on. I'm not sure that it will be acceptable here, or actually the future state we want. So I just wanted to raise it as an item we might want to look at as councillors. That I think it started from next year, if I'm correct. Yeah, you can be invited as a guest, but you will not participate.
So they can still have councillors come to the meeting, but we are not voting members of it, is the sort of clarity on it. Mayor or otherwise, any other councillor, even if you have knowledge. And in fact, from the audit committee, I was the only one who was already pre-qualified, which you have to be pre-qualified under the New South Wales state government And I'm the only one that is, so I still can't be on it. I don't think it's the smartest move they've made.
So I suppose my suggestion is potentially as council, we might want to have a look at that. I can send it out, it's on the hub, but we can send that specific part out and see if we do want to make that. How does council feel about that? Do we want to make that a recommendation back or leave that back to Office of Local Government?
Yep. I'm happy if we want to consider that as noting the recommendations from the Audit Risk Committee, but that we actually write to the Minister highlighting our concerns over the fact that there is no voting members who are elected members of council.
You have to move something like that and then.
Councillor, so noting and that we write to the Minister. We might actually get the Canberra Region Joint Organisation to do that as well. They may not take much notice of us, but it's worth a shot. And so we've got a mover and seconder. Are you happy with that, Councillor Furry, as the seconder?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Frost.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And Madam Mayor, I decline to second. I find the process already frustrating. It's made less so by the fact that we have 2 voting members on the committee. But I look at these minutes and I think, what am I noting? There's nothing to note. There is the summary of the staff recommendations and a list of resolutions, none of which make a lot of sense unless you go and consult a whole lot of other documents. And I find that frustrating as a councillor and somebody as an ordinary member of the public. I just think it's absolutely just completely useless. And so I'm thinking that we might even have, without even having 2 representatives on that count, what on earth relationship to council does this committee have? If it's a state government committee, then form it up as a state government committee and tell us that's what it is as part of the department. Don't pretend that somehow it's linked to, and we've got some responsibility for it, because we don't. And even now, as I say, the information coming back from mine, and it's the way we do minutes, and I'm not going to get into that discussion again. The information coming back is pretty ordinary, and it'll be even less so when we don't have to discuss.
Did you need some wording? So I just found the actual page.
Well, I just put that you wanted to write to the Minister outlining your concerns with the lack of council or representatives on the ARIC committee.
Yeah, so it's the proposed core requirements for appointing independent audit risk and improvement committee.
Okay. I'll just get Chris to note that so he can dig it up. So that's fine. Okay, anyone else wish to speak for or against? All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against?
Aye.
Councillor Frost, Councillor Ferry. Did you say you're?
Well, that was an aye, Madam Mayor.
I am in as opposed to I am out. Okay.
I'm in.
Councillor Frost is out, noting. Thank you. If we could then, we've got to now move into closed session to discuss the confidential matter we noted before. So if I could have a mover and seconder to go into closed. Councillor Burgess, thank you, and Councillor Turner. All those in favour? Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you. And we'll just close off the live streaming at this stage while the councillors discuss the item in confidential. I'm sure he's ready.